Hello, welcome to The Conversation on New Central Television. This is a program where we bring you up to speed with all the political happenings on the African continent. I am Gbenga Aborowa. Today on the program, we will be looking at what lies ahead for Angolans following João Lourenço's re-election for second term in office as president. We will also be looking at developments in South Africa, where President Ramaphosa is set to face an investigative panel over his controversial Phala farm heist. So we begin in South Africa, where the parliament has appointed an independent panel to determine whether President Ramaphosa should face impeachment over the alleged cover-up of a heist at his luxury farmhouse. National Assembly Speaker Novisiwe Mapisa Nkakula named the panel in a statement overnight on Wednesday. The three-man panel is headed by former Chief Justice Sandile Nkobo and includes a former High Court judge and a university professor. It will have 30 days to report its findings. The scandal around President Ramaphosa erupted in June after South Africa's former national spy boss Arthur Fraser filed a complaint with the police. He alleged that robbers broke into the president's farm in the northeast of the country, where they stole $4 million in cash stashed in furniture. Now, joining us this evening from Pretoria in South Africa, we have Jean-Louis Nel, an attorney. Thank you very much for joining us on the conversation, Jean-Louis.
Thank you for having me.
Now, Jean-Louis, is this parliamentary panel that has been set up, is it a step in the right direction in investigating the Phala farm scandal?
Yeah, so I mean, it's an interesting movement in regarding the Constitution and so on. This is the first time that a panel like this has been constituted. So the panel gets its powers from Section 89 of the Constitution, and that's sort of when the president can be removed by the National Assembly based on a serious violation of the Constitution or serious misconduct or inability to perform the functions of the office. Now, considering this process that's going to be followed, it's in terms of the National Assembly rules. Now, in itself, it doesn't have, I would say, enough teeth to sort of move the matter in the right direction, because what the panel is actually just going to do is have a preliminary investigation in terms of the evidence that's been submitted by the complainant, and thereafter they would refer it to another committee in government in the parliament to consider it, and then only thereafter it would be put to vote to determine whether the president should in actual fact be removed from his office.
Now, Jean-Louis, what do you make of the composition of the panel and their pedigree? And what was the process behind their appointment? Because a lot of people are wondering what makes these three names thick and why were they chosen?
Yeah, I mean, it's worthy to note that actually 17 people were nominated for this panel. Of the 17, only 8 availed themselves. Now, I've noted that sort of the people that would represent on this panel was retired judges, and then obviously, as you also mentioned, a professor from the UCT. But again, it's sort of what they can do is they can only consider what evidence has been presented. Mm-hmm. Now, at the end of the day, where we have the separation of powers, we've got the executive, the judiciary. To actually find the president guilty of a crime, that would not be in the ambit of the scope and the powers that this panel have. At most, it's sort of a political process that has been followed. To be guilty of any misconduct, and from what I've noted, is that the motion has been submitted on contravention of the Prevention of Organized Crime Act. But again, that is something that the court should decide. I don't think it's in the ambit of the panel to make such a decision.
So what exactly is the mandate of this panel if they can't decide what took place? Will the members of the panel be working with law enforcement to investigate the Phala heist? Because we're just wondering what exactly, why is this panel constituted in the first place? If they can't tell you if the president is guilty or not.
Yeah, and that's sort of what makes this quite awkward in a situation like this. So the panel is just going to review the evidence. they can make a recommendation to the National Assembly, sort of to guide National Assembly to make a decision whether they're going to remove the president, which would be a political decision being made. And sort of to make that decision, it would require 2/3 of the National Assembly to vote in favor of such a motion. So it's sort of more just guiding the members of Parliament. But in stating that, the Parliament on its own, if one considers the seats of the various opposition parties, even if all the opposition parties would vote in favor of removing the president in terms of this committee's finding or the panel's finding, the ANC will be required that 25 or 23% of the ANC would be required to break rank in their own party to vote against such a motion.
Now, Jean-Louis, the ANC constitution does say that if you've been accused of a crime, you should recluse yourself pending investigation. We saw that with the former General Secretary, Ace Magashule. Why is it applying to President Ramaphosa, who's a subject of an investigation?
And that's a good question. And that's sort of, there's a lot of call from opposition parties to say, well, if you've been implicated, the right thing to do is to step aside, let the law take its course. And the same applies to the ANC as well. But once again, one has to consider that this is a political game, it's political mongering. Whether people or whether the leaders in those different political parties would abide by their own decisions, whether it's sort of just to ease the voters' tension, etc., to say, well, look, this is what we're going to do, this is the policy. Whether that's going to happen, I can't tell you. And it makes it quite difficult. If one considers this process, Pala, this matter happened in 2020. 16 months later, just before the 2020 elective conference of the ANC, Arthur Fraser, who was the top spy at that stage, sort of made these revelations. The matter was referred to for criminal investigation. But it's also worthy to note that the timing of the complaint by Arthur Fraser was 3 weeks before the Zondo Commission released the report in terms of where Arthur Fraser is held accountable for corruption. So it's a timing thing. Whether there's true value to all the steps that's been taken in the past 6 months, we will only see once the judiciary, the investigating prosecuting authority, South African Revenue Service, the Reserve Bank, sort of commenced with their investigation, and then we'll be able to actually get to the bottom of this matter.
Now, Jean-Louis, this panel has 30 days to present its findings to Parliament. What happens after this 30 days? And yes.
Yes, like I previously indicated, this is the first time that a panel like this is going to consider a matter like this. It hasn't happened in the past. But once they've made their findings or their recommendations, the matter is then referred to another committee in Parliament, the impeachment committee. The impeachment committee will then consider whether the recommendations and the findings are correct, and they will consider also the veracity of the evidence that has been submitted. It's worthy to note that both of this panel and the committee on impeachment don't have investigating powers. They can only work with the evidence that has been presented. Now, once it has been at the impeachment committee, they would make a further recommendation whether the motion should be tabled in the National Assembly. So there's a lot of steps that need to take place, and it doesn't guarantee that the president would be removed in terms of Section 89 of the South African Constitution.
It will still have to be. It will still have to be subjected to a parliamentary vote in order to institute impeachment proceedings, I believe.
That is correct. And the timing of it is very, very interesting, because once the president is removed, so the South African Constitution provides that the president can appoint ministers, deputy presidents, etc. Now, if you have party leaders that vote against the president, you have the possibility by cutting off your nose to spite the face that you won't be in power anymore.
Does the President of the Republic of South Africa enjoy immunity from criminal prosecution?
Not at all. And it's quite clear if one considers what happened with our erstwhile President Jacob Zuma, that was almost arrested on the eve that he had to report. So yes, nobody receives immunity. South Africa governs, the constitution is about the rule of law, and nobody is immune to that. The issue would be is that the wheels of justice turns very slowly, but it does turn.
Now, there are concerns by members of the opposition, especially the economic freedom fighters. I did listen to Julius Malema. He says that there are attempts to stop the process and stop Parliament from exercising its oversight functions over the executive in this matter. There's also the case of the composition of some of the panelists. For example, Professor Calland was once an advisor to the ANC in the Western Cape. Are these legitimate concerns, or the EFF and other opposition members just being politicians?
Yeah, I mean, it's a political process. There's various role players involved in it. Role players from opposition, from the governing party. And again, it's sort of a process that's going to be followed. Now, regarding the competencies of the panel that was appointed, if I recall, the DA also made mention that they're not happy with the professor of law that being appointed because of the views that he has expressed. But again, this panel doesn't have the same rights and powers as what the judiciary would have. So they would make recommendations, but for all intents and purposes, it's not binding. The Parliament, at the end of the day, will still have to pass the motion and vote and use their own competencies to determine whether this impeachment would succeed. But that doesn't mean the president is guilty. The president can only be found guilty of a court of law, except if there's a breach of the rules of Parliament. But what he is being tasked to provide feedback on and the accusations against him, that is a matter for the court of law to decide.
Now, we do agree that corruption is a big problem in the Republic of South Africa, and like you said earlier, that the president is not immune from is not immune from prosecution. Now, you also said that the wheels of justice grind slowly. Last week or 2 weeks ago, President Ramaphosa did constitute a panel, an advisory panel, to advise him on corruption. What are ordinary South Africans? What do they make of all of this? Because it's been dragging on for so long.
I think from a personal point of view, the frustration is that there's these panels, commissions, committees, everything to address sort of corruption. And at the end of the day, most of the times it boils down to sort of, it's a political game. It's sort of trying to win votes, etc. I believe the governing party should do much more in terms of the law, etc., to sort of root out corruption. But one sits with a governing party that has the elective conference in December, and there's a big division in the governing party itself in terms of policies that should be followed. The corruption it's a very nice political tool to use because everyone is tired of corruption. They just want to grow the economy. And again, it's a carrot in front of voters' noses to sort of vote or sway their votes in a certain direction.
Justice,
it's quite difficult.
Justice Raymond Zondo did submit the three-part report, I believe, and it did take a lot of resources and time. Do you think President Ramaphosa has the political will to go ahead and follow through some of the recommendations of that report?
So I suppose the beauty of it is that in South Africa we've got the separation of powers. Irrespective of what the executive might feel should happen with the Zondo Commission, we still have the judiciary and national prosecuting authority, SARS, that can move forward with against those that have been implicated. They have the necessary investigating powers to make sure that justice is brought to the South African citizens. So irrespective of what the ANC or the DA or all the political parties might feel, the question would be whether the authorities that have the necessary power, whether they can exercise their powers without fear, favour or prejudice.
Now, I know you touched on this earlier, Jean-Louis. President Cyril Ramaphosa's office, in the wake of this Fala farm scandal, said that the motive and timing of former State Security Agency head Arthur Fraser's criminal case against him needs to be questioned as to why he went public about the robbery 2 years after it occurred. You did mention this earlier. What's your reaction to this? Does it really matter who the messenger is? And do you sense any political motives behind this?
Yeah, so it's interesting. In the last few days, one of the ex-former wives of the president of Jacob Zuma is actually of the intention to contest the elections in December regarding the presidency of the ANC. And it is not, it's common cause that sort of there was a faction division between President Jacob Zuma and President Cyril Ramaphosa, who have different views in terms of the ideologies of where the ANC should go. So there's a lot of murking of the water, mud throwing at this stage. And if one really considers the timing of it, whether there's actual substantial reason for initially for bringing this matter, Arthur Fraser, for bringing this matter to the attention of the public, it is something that one needs to consider in the bigger sphere of the political game. What is sad about it is that it is very damaging for the image of South Africa, which is dependent on foreign investments, that political games is getting this much of attention, whereas suppose it shouldn't be because of one has to settle a score with another one.
But regardless of settling scores, I mean, President Ramaphosa came into office saying he was going to fight corruption. Are you not happy that this is out there in the open, and then South African citizens to know the sorts of things that happens at that level?
No, I believe that it's very important that there is accountability in government, yes, that everyone should know what's going on, especially the voters. And it's good that these processes are followed. The question is, why are these processes only followed now? If this was a big thing, 2020 it's almost 2 years ago when this matter first appeared. And it was kept under the sheets for what reason whatsoever. But the process, yes, it should be followed. The concern is that the process is being affected negatively because of political mongering.
Yes. Now, I know you don't have a crystal ball in front of you, but how do you see this investigation of the panel playing out? What's likely going to be the verdict of the panel, looking at the evidence that we've seen so far? I mean, even from an observer's point of view, you can, deduce a thing or two. Do you think Ramaphosa will have a prima facie case to answer?
No, definitely. I mean, the allegations is levied. Cyril Ramaphosa has indicated that he'll follow the process, that he would work together with all the authorities to get to the bottom of this. How I see it play out, that's a different question. I mean, there's a lot of processes that needs to be followed. This is the first time, like I've indicated, that we have this type of inquiry. December is very close for the elective conference. Unfortunately, the executive branch of South Africa is often opinion that the judiciary, the legal courts and so on shouldn't mix with politics. But most probably what might happen is there's going to be findings, and the finding is going to be taken on review, and this matter is it's going to be a can that's been kicked down the road.
Now let's look at the opposition parties in South Africa. How are they taking advantage of this? It seems to be one scandal after the other in the ANC, and what are the implications for the voters?
Yeah, I mean, if one considers voters, and if you have to ask yourself who you're going to vote for, it's a very difficult question. There's not one political party that is not immune in South Africa to sort of bad publicity or to some sort of a scandal. We've got an opposition party where the leader of the opposition has been numerous times before the court for various charges. The DA has been implicated in certain aspects, whether that is true or not. So if one considers the political atmosphere, it's sort of everyone has their finger in the pie, and sort of there's something going on. And there's not clarity in terms of, being straightforward, being honest. And again, this might be a political game that is employed by the different political parties, sort of to throw mud against your opposition, etc.
So, there's a lot going on there, but what are the implications of the findings on President Ramaphosa's presidency and the ANC in general?
Yeah, so I mean, at the end of the day, in South Africa, it's you're innocent until proven guilty. Now, yes, this might be uncomfortable for President Cyril Ramaphosa, where this process is at this stage. But he remains the president of the country. The process, the motion to remove him as a president has not commenced. You've previously mentioned about the 50 days that the deliberation should be finalized. From what I understand, the panel has not even considered the matter. So that still needs to happen. Moving forward, we've got our elections in 2024. Whether this would damage the president's image, we don't know. But we'll see what is the outcome of the panel and the discussion. And like I've mentioned previously, if it comes to the point where the motion is actually tabled in Parliament to remove the president, the National Assembly still requires 2/3 of votes to approve the motion. And just considering that the ANC holds 57% of the votes in Assembly, it's highly unlikely that they on their own will be able, even if they just get one of the opposition parties to vote with them, that they would oust one of their own.
But there are talks that there are actually some rebels within the ANC that are not happy with President Ramaphosa. Don't you think they might vote against him?
So it would require half of the ANC to vote against the president on the assumption that all the opposition parties also vote in favor of the motion.
Now, if it's a black and white case and you know that, look, the president is guilty of breaking the laws of the land, does political interest come first before morality? Because we seem to have assumed that they're going to save one of their own.
And that's a very good question. And again, it boils down to the powers that a president has. President can appoint the ministers, the deputy president. Now, the question is, if you, in your sane mind, would you implicate your employer with the possibility that you won't have a job the next day? You won't enjoy the benefits of being a member of parliament. And especially where the ANC doesn't hold the the 2/3 majority which they previously held. Will that be enough for any delegate in the ANC to make a decision to say, you know what, I'm standing up for this or for that. I'm going to make a moral decision instead of thinking about my own pocket and my employment.
Thank you very much, Jean-Louis Now, for joining us on today's conversation. We'll definitely be monitoring events in South Africa. Let's see what happens after 30 days when this panel is due to submit its report. I do appreciate your insights and contribution on the subject. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you for having me. Have a great evening.
You too. You're watching The Conversation on News Central Television. When we return from this break, we will be going to Angola, where President João Lourenço of the MPLA has been sworn in for a second term in office. Do stay with us. We'll be right back.